Good morning. We're approaching 10 o'clock, so it's exactly 10 o'clock. Okay, so let's get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Natalie Paremba. I am the coordinator for the Crown Managers Partnership. And we are so excited to have you here today for our webinar, Watershed Integrity in the Crown, which is the second in our series, Conservation, the Crown, and Coffee. So hopefully you've got your cup of coffee or tea or hot chocolate, and you're ready to learn from some experts throughout the Crown with us today. A few pieces of housekeeping before we get going. To note that this session is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our website and then also in a follow-up email after this session is over. We also ask that you please mute your phone or your computer mic, and also that you keep your video off unless you are speaking, and this will just help us manage any sort of bandwidth issues. Also, please type questions or comments into the chat at any point during the webinar. Each speaker will have about 5 minutes to answer any questions at the end of their presentations. So please feel free to ask as many questions as you are wondering. And I also want to place us into the context of the geography before we get to our speakers. The Crown of the Continent ecosystem is often referred to as the water tower of North America. The glaciers, rivers, and streams of the Crown of the Continent ecosystem feed the headwaters of 3 of North America's great watersheds, the Columbia, the Missouri, and the Saskatchewan. And millions of people, both in the Crown and downstream of the Crown, rely on its waters for drinking, irrigation, recreation, making water like really the lifeblood of the Crown of the Continent ecosystem. So today we have 3 speakers that are going to share their work that they've done to keep our waters intact and resilient. So first, we're going to hear from Chris Downs, and Chris Downs is the Aquatics and Science Program Manager for Glacier National Park. And he is going to talk about pretty much all things water related in Glacier National Park, native salmonids, water quality. He might even throw some air quality in there. And then our second speaker is Elliot Fox, and Elliot is a member of the Kainai First Nation, the Blood Tribe in Southern Alberta, and is currently working as an independent consultant in Southwest Alberta. He has worked in the area of natural renewable resource conservation, land management, and climate adaptation for the past 26 years in Southern Alberta, and has been employed with federal, provincial, and tribal governments and non-government organizations. Elliot was the assistant project manager for the 2020 to 2021 Blackfoot Confederacy native trout project that just finished up their field work earlier this month. So he's going to share with us some of their findings today. And our final speaker is Kate Wilson, and she is with the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, and she manages the Upper Columbia Conservation Commission and the Flathead Basin Commission. And she is going to talk to us about the impacts of aquatic invasive species. Kate is also a steering committee member for the Crown Managers Partnership, and so she is going to provide some perspective on the CMP's aquatic invasive species influence. And lastly, she's going to cover sort of the evolution of aquatic invasive species programming in the West. So that's a lot to cover in an hour. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who is going to kick us off.
Thank you, Natalie. Let me figure out my screen sharing here. Share. So as Natalie said, I'm going to update folks on sort of some of our aquatics projects that we've been doing for a number of years and some new projects. I also oversee the physical science program, so we'll talk a little bit about water quality because that's all related to watershed health, as well as air quality because air quality also affects watershed health. So about 10 years ago, we started a project to remove invasive lake trout from one of our lakes, Quartz Lake, and more recently, we began doing that on Logging Lake as well. Lake trout have been in the park for a number of decades, but they continue to expand and negatively impact our native trout populations. And until 2009, Quartz Lake was the largest natural lake supporting bull trout that had a wholly native species assemblage, and that came to an end when we discovered lake trout in there. So what usually happens is lake trout take over and the native species suffer, whether that's Yellowstone cutthroat trout in Yellowstone Lake or bull trout in Glacier Park. It's the same pattern. So we go out and we net adults in the fall when they're spawning, and we net juveniles in the spring because they're accessible. And we need to be able to separate our nets from where the catch is lower for native species, so we're not harming native fish. At the same time, we're removing these invasive lake trout. We've had some success at reducing the numbers. This is our juvenile trends over time. We use standardized nets so we can track our success over time, and our catch. This is our catch per kilometer of net set, and we set probably maybe 60 kilometers of net in a lake that's only about 2.5 kilometers long. So it's a lot of net we set. We set it really deep, typically over 130 feet, because we typically only find little lake trout at that depth. We don't get into our mountain whitefish and our native species. So this is a trend of catch per unit effort over time, number of lake trout we catch per kilometer of net set. And you can see we've done a really good job at reducing the number of juvenile lake trout in Quartz Lake over time. The issue is, what do we do once we get way down here, where the cost of catching a little lake trout is much, much greater because you have to set more net to get them. You're going to catch more of the native fish you don't want to catch. So we need to figure out how to maybe do some things a little differently to push past this. But we've been successful at substantially reducing juvenile lake trout abundance. Same thing with adult lake trout. We've been able to bring them down to about a third of where they were, but we typically get between 40 and 60 adult lake trout every year. And we have to figure out how to sort of push through that. We've reduced their abundance quite significantly. In 2019, however, we did have quite a few more adult lake trout we caught in our nets, and that's because those fish were produced back in 2008, even before we started the project. It takes 7 or 8 years for them to mature when we would actually catch them in our adult nets. So this probably represents a pulse of new adults coming into the system that we're removing. And again, this past year, we did a good job removing those because we're back to where we have been, roughly a third of what we were at before in terms of adult lake trout abundance. But it seems to be enough to hold our native fish stable. So I have here a graph of bull trout red counts. Basically, it's a spawning survey. We count their spawning nests in the stream each year. This red line represents when we started our suppression activities, and bull trout spawning numbers varied quite a bit. And a lot of this variation is because we had different people doing the counts. But basically, before and after, not a lot different, which means bull trout are not being substantially impacted by lake trout like they have in our other lakes, where these numbers here have gone to basically zero after a few decades of lake trout there. The metric we use for cutthroat trout is angler catch rate, and that has remained fairly stable as well. It bounces around, but those are both good signs. We're not necessarily getting rid of all the lake trout, but we have reduced them enough that they're not having an adverse impact at this time on our native fish populations. I don't know if we're ever going to get all of them out of there. It seems like that would be a really, really challenging thing to do. And we'd have to get really creative and also have a little bit of luck on our side. But this may be a situation where you're looking at something similar to terrestrial weed management. You keep those lake trout at a level where they're not adversely affecting the ecosystem, but they're still going to be on the landscape. So recognizing that this is a really big challenge for a lot of folks managing native fish as the impacts of non-native fish. Sort of a different way to look at the problem is, if we can't be successful in these larger connected lakes, maybe we can set up some refuges for native fish in places above waterfalls where we don't have those non-native lake trout, and sort of spread the risk where we'll still have bull trout on our landscape and create some self-sustaining populations in other places. This happens to be Logging Lake in the North Fork Flathead, and this is a waterfall between Logging Lake and Grace Lake. So what we decided to do was go in and rescue the last year class of bull trout that was in Logging Creek, that had spawned in Logging Creek, and put them upstream in Logging Lake, where there was a non-native population of Yellowstone cutthroat trout, so they could hopefully act as a biocontrol while establishing a population with the same genetic background, and thereby conserving that unique genetic lineage. So we electrofished, and we only found basically 1 year class of juveniles, and genetically they were from 2 or 3 parents. That was it. That was all that was left. So we electroshocked them, put them in a backpack with oxygen, and carried them upstream and let them go. And then based on the genetics, we weren't comfortable trying to start a population basically with that limited of a genetic makeup of only 2 to 3 parents. So we went into Quartz Lake and we captured adult bull trout at the inlet, and then at night in the fall with Creston National Fish Hatchery. And our goal was to get 4 females and 8 males every year, and then take those eggs to the hatchery, pack them out in little coolers, take them to the hatchery, because Creston has really good history and experience with raising bull trout. You can see each year we did this. We didn't know really how many eggs we were gonna, how the eggs were gonna survive. So we ended up with more juvenile bull trout than we needed each time. So we reduced our egg take each time, trying to just partially spawn the females. And in this year, 2018, the crew was up there, and a grizzly bear found our stash of bull trout we were waiting to spawn the next day, and kind of smashed all the containers and let all the fish go. So they went back up there that evening, and while they were waiting, the bear came back and was kind of sneaking around in the bushes around them. So they got just 1 female and 1 male and got out of there. They decided that was a better decision. So we were able to stock all these juvenile bull trout at age 0, so young of the year, which would have the least potential hatchery impact or selection, as well as some really larger 1-year-old fish. The larger the fish, the higher the survival is going to be. And Creston does a really good job. These were really big bull trout. They have optimal water temperature to rear bull trout, and it's interesting. They have suboptimal water temperature to rear rainbow trout that they rear for, put and take fisheries. But they do a really good job rearing bull trout. And we documented wild spawning in Grace Lake in both 2019 and 2020. Fairly limited, just a couple of reds, but we're happy to see that at least they're figuring out some places to spawn. And the next thing we need to do is go and see if those reds produce juveniles. And then I think we'll say the project is a success. Another project along similar lines, we have non-native Yellowstone cutthroat trout in the Camas drainage, and they're upstream of native West Slope cutthroat trout and bull trout. And we wanted to remove those Yellowstone cutthroat trout because they pose a genetic risk to downstream native West Slope cutthroat trout. And again, at the same time, establish some populations of native fish. They're already non-native fish there. So we're not like adding fish to a fishless lake. It's basically saying, hey, if we're gonna have fish there, let's at least have fish that are native to the drainage. So that was our plan. And it was a big partnership. We worked with Fish, Wildlife and Parks and the Glacier Conservancy and the USGS and the Fish and Wildlife Service. So it was really a big project, and it was a big lift because it was, I don't know, it's like 12 miles into the backcountry, and it's just gorgeous. There's a series of waterfalls down here. This is the Camas drainage looking downstream from the trail going up to Camas Lake. And this is beautiful spawning habitat coming out of Camas Lake. It's just ideal cold water temperatures. So we had to fly in all these barrels of rotenone, which is the toxicant that kills gill-breathing animals. And we deployed it using boats and backpack sprayers. And then in order to protect the downstream fish populations, you deactivate it with potassium permanganate. So we have a little auger here that just drips out permanganate, and it turns the water purple for a little while until the permanganate's all absorbed. And we did that for about a month until the lake completely detoxified, so it was safe to stop detoxifying downstream. And we camped up there. It was beautiful. So we did the treatment in the fall of last year. It was highly successful. We did find a few fish further downstream in Camas Lake. So we didn't get a complete kill, but we got almost everything. And our plan is to put, what we did, we put 1,000 genetically pure cutthroat trout that we locally sourced. So we weren't just trying to put any cutthroat stock up there. Sort of the same idea with, we're trying to protect local stocks, and some of these stocks are being hybridized on the North Fork. So if we're going to protect a stock, why not protect those that are at risk? So we took fish from Hay Creek and Starvation Creek. One's on the Forest Service side, one's in the park. Mixed them together, and those are the fish that are going back in there. And we'll swamp out any remaining non-native Yellowstone genetics that way. And we plan to put bull trout in there as well. Another project we are considering, it's in the NEPA process, is Gunsight Lake. We don't really, we haven't done many projects on the east side of the park in the St. Mary drainage. And this is an opportunity to remove rainbow trout from Gunsight Lake and replace them again with native fish that are native at least to the St. Mary system, West Slope cutthroat trout and bull trout. We would again locally source those. We have a bunch of small fragmented and slightly hybridized West Slope cutthroat in the St. Mary drainage. We'd like to expand their distribution, help them out with climate change, perhaps by putting them in the highest, well, a really high mountain lake. We have some funding for this project already secured through the Park Service, but we're going through the NEPA process. So no decision has been made to do the project, but we're in the planning phase here. This is just an example. The amazing things you can do with just basic fish finders these days. This is a fish finder we bought, and we drug it around with an inflatable kayak all over the lake and made this really nice bathymetric map of the entire lake. And we just did it with a car battery and a little fish finder. Super powerful. And we're able to calculate volume because we need to know volume in order to know how much chemical we need to apply to the lake, because it's all very standard. We're looking for basically a certain percentage. So you're not overdoing it and not underdoing it. So that's in the works as a potential project as well. We also do water quality monitoring. We monitor streams in and around the park. This is just some basic water quality data, just as an example, from the North Fork of the Flathead. You know, I try and keep it simple. We measure all kinds of things through our vital signs program, but the things that stand out to me that we look at on a day-to-day basis, you know, is the water clean? What's the pH doing? And what is water temperature doing? Those are things that I understand. I'm not a water chemistry guy, but they're things I understand how they affect fish. Alkalinity represents the buffering capacity of the water from acids. So it's kind of important to watch alkalinity, because if it's changing, it could be an indication that your acid inputs are changing over time. And then water temperature, everybody kind of understands this. You know, this is a short-term increasing trend in average water temperature in the North Fork near the Canadian border. So those things, you know, how those things play out are going to affect the ecosystem. We had some concerns as far as, you know, increasing use in the wild and scenic portions of the Flathead River in the States. And folks are asking, you know, are we seeing contamination either from people having bad septic systems along the river or from people not disposing of waste properly? So we went out and measured in multiple points each year on the North and Middle Fork during the summertime. And to answer the question, the water's really, really clean. This is the state standard for Class A1 waters, which are suitable for cold water, aquaculture, drinking with simple disinfection. We're an order of magnitude under that in terms of the coliform levels over time and over space. And this happens to be the EPA criteria for bathing, basically swimming water, and we are way, way under that. So basically, it doesn't look like we're having water quality impacts from folks at least in terms of bacterial contamination, which should be an indicator of other things. We don't measure everything, but it's one indicator that you can use. So I think things look pretty good. And the same thing for Lake McDonald. Another thing we look at is water transparency. Our lakes, you know, based on studies done by the Flathead Lake Biological Station a long time ago, we have really clean water. We have high water quality, and our waters are ultra oligotrophic, super unproductive. And it results in really high transparency. And you can see some of the transparencies. Basically, we use a Secchi disc, which is a round disc with black and white color, and you lower it down until you can't see it anymore. Then you pull it up, lower it back down, and then you measure that distance where you can't see it anymore. And you can monitor that over time to look for changes in the trophic status of the lake. Or receiving nutrient pollution, for example, that would decrease the Secchi depth over time because you get more productivity and more plankton you wouldn't be able to see as well. And you can see some of these lakes. So blue, that's Waterton. We didn't get up there this year, but it's still really, really transparent. No trends over time. You can see about 30 feet in the summertime. Compare that to Lake McDonald. You know, this is super high, even compared to other Northwest Montana lakes, being able to see almost 60 feet underwater. And it's variable over time and by observer and weather conditions, but you get enough data, and over time it gives you a pretty good picture of whether things are changing or not. Changing up gears a little bit here, we also monitor air quality. We have a multi-program site at Glacier. It's part of a national network. We monitor all kinds of things. This happens to be part of the mercury deposition network. And we know mercury affects watershed health. It gets into the aquatic and terrestrial food webs. So it's an important thing we monitor. And we're the only, look at these little dots here. We're the only one in this area, the only monitoring site in this area. So it's really important. And the red indicates higher levels of mercury deposition. And a lot of this is elevation, because mercury is a global pollutant. It's up in the atmosphere and it goes around and around the globe. Comes down to the earth, goes to a watershed, gets converted to methyl mercury where it's taken up by fish and the aquatic systems, or goes back in the air and travels around. But anyway, high elevations, yet we get it through our precipitation. And so our mercury looks higher, but no trends over time. So that's relatively good news. I mean, we'd like to see it lower, but anyway, we're not seeing a trend of increasing mercury deposition. Visibility, it's one of the things that is an important characteristic of Glacier Park, and it's actually something that's legislated. We're not supposed to see a decline in visibility in Class 1 airsheds, which happens to be on the national parks, including Glacier, so we measure visibility. The nephelometer is something that measures light scattering coefficients, so high bars like this indicate poor visibility, a lot of particles in the air. And this is just an example of the data over the course of a year. And, we get wood smoke in the fall that affects visibility, and we get, forest fires and things like that. It's fairly simple. It's only telling us that we have reduced visibility. But we also have this improve network, which is a bunch of filters. It actually tells us what is infecting our air quality. What are the constituents? I can't see because our chart is obscured by my face here, but you can see we had a big fire year in 2003, and we had a lot of haze. But over time, things look pretty good. There's not a big change in visibility and haze over time. Ozone affects human health. It affects plants. We monitor that over time. And again, no trend, and we're below the ozone health standard for people over time, going back to 1990. We also monitor deposition through the Clean Air Status and Trends Network, and we're looking at base cations, which are things like potassium and magnesium that are important for soil health and plants. And they also help, neutralize acid precipitation that can come down and start to acidify your soils. And that's where we're looking at sulfur and nitrogen, because those can lead to acidification of soil and water. And again, we're not seeing much for trends over time there. So that is also good news. We got some concerns about the dust. If you've ever driven up the North Fork, it's a very dusty road where it's not paved. And we've had some concerns expressed by folks that maybe the dust is having a negative impact on water quality or on air quality in the park. We didn't have any data, so we got this mobile monitoring system called the EBAM. It's an environmental beta attenuation monitor. It basically shoots these beta particles through a filter, and it tells you how much PM10 or particles that are smaller than 10 microns you have in the air at any one time. This map is the outside North Fork Road, and what I've done is I've marked areas where it's less than 100 meters from the stream or the park boundary. And this is because most road dust doesn't really travel that far. So just when we look at this, it doesn't look like there's even much potential to have an adverse effect on the park from water quality perspective or air quality perspective north of the Camas Road, but it is along the river as we head south. So first thing to do is to measure and see if we actually have road dust coming into the park. So we looked at multiple distances from the park. This is the North Fork Camas Road, 1,700 meters from the North Fork Road. Basically no road dust. This is a health standard for PM10. So this would be smoke, road dust, everything like that. 800 meters from the road, again, no issue with dust. But when we get really close to the road here, it is measurable. And this was right across from a really dusty piece of road. This big peak right here, that happened to be when all that smoke came in this summer. So the road dust baseline, is still not a human health hazard, but it is reaching, the river and the park based on just, what we know about the health of the North Fork of the Flathead. It isn't obvious that there's an impact from it, from road dust, and the plants look good. And when you look at how much sediment is actually coming down the river in a year, if you go in the spring and it's kind of like chocolate brown and you have these big cut banks giving sediment to the river, it's likely not. but it's really a hard thing to say it's not having an effect, say at some small level on bugs, because that's a really difficult study to do. But the cursory information we have is the river seems to be in pretty good shape from an overall water quality perspective. Well, that's all I have for you. That's kind of a lot of things to touch on. I don't know if I have time for questions, Natalie.
Thanks, Chris. And we can definitely take a question. I see one in the chat regarding road dust issues. Given the trade-offs to paving, for example, permeability, what do you think is the answer to potential dust impairments?
Right, that's a big question, and you know, road dust, it's not obviously jumping out as a huge impact. You know, it's a nuisance to people on the road, but you have to look at, you know, if you were to pave that road, what would that have bigger adverse impacts to the watershed as a whole by increasing development? I mean, that's probably the number one thing that degrades a watershed. More people, basically, right? More development. So if you were to pave a road all the way up there and put power in and all these things, I think that would have a much larger negative impact on the entire watershed. And that's just my personal opinion, than the road dust situation. And they have been treating it with, you know, some dust palliatives, or, you know, basically salt. And, you know, people get concerned over it going into the water, but I don't think they're putting it on at levels that, you know, are having an effect on water quality. So, I mean, for me, I'd say keep treating it, you know, as needed to keep the dust down. But I don't know if, well, we don't have the data to really show what the impact is to measure that little impact, but there certainly are trade-offs with paving it versus not paving it. But treating it certainly seems to be alleviate the concerns over dust from people.
Awesome, thank you, Chris. And I see a couple more questions have come in, but we are going to move on to our next speaker. And if there's time at the end of the webinar, we'll have an open floor to ask more questions. And then also we'll have the contact information of the speakers available. So next up we have Elliot Fox.
Okay, Damix ganatuni. Get connect to Matsimboa. Mistu on the go Makoyo Gin. So I just said hello. Good morning. Glad to see everyone. My name is Elliot Fox. My Blackfoot name is Wolf Collar. So that's what I just said in the Blackfoot language. So yeah, first of all, I just want to thank the Crown Managers Partnership and Natalie for coordinating the Conservation, the Crown and Coffee webinar series. I'm very honored to be asked to present on the Blackfoot Confederacy Native Trout Recovery Project. Yeah, so we just finished our first year of data collection and our field work. So we're gonna process all our data and our stats in the next couple of months. So I don't have a whole bunch for graphs or statistical analysis yet. So when we get the report, I will keep in touch with Natalie. So anybody who's interested, we can certainly provide the report if you want. Okay, I'm gonna try to figure out this screen share. So, okay. So this is just a picture of the North Belly River, right near the international boundary in Waterton Glacier International Peace Park. This was last month. We just got our first snow, and we had to go do red surveys. It was pretty chilly, but we got her done. Yeah, so our project is the 2021 Blackfoot Confederacy Aboriginal Fund for Species at Risk Native Trout Recovery Project. So it's a Blackfoot shared leadership and capacity support in native trout, addressing climate change, non-native species, and habitats loss. Yeah, so anyway, so our partners are the Blackfoot Confederacy, that's this, their logo, and the 4 tribes, 3 are in Canada, 1 is in the United States. So there's a blood tribe where I'm from, the Piikani, who are just between Pincher Creek and Fort Macleod. Siksika Nation is east of Calgary, and the Blackfeet, or Amskapi Piikani, are in northern Montana. So that's the Blackfoot Confederacy. And our partners this year were Parks Canada, Waterton Lakes, Alberta Environment and Parks, the Cows and Fish Program, also known as the Alberta Habitat, or Alberta Riparian Habitat Management Society. We're also partnered with the University of Victoria with Dr. Karen Helbing. She's going to be doing our eDNA processing. Trout Unlimited was also a partner with some of the restoration work, and the Old Man Watershed Council. So we had about 11 partners for our project this year. So this is what we call a traditional area. It's west of the Old Man Gap, for those that are familiar with southern Alberta. So you go through the gap in the Livingstone Range, and it's the Upper Old Man. Yeah, so that's what we traditionally call it. I'm just gonna briefly talk about the Blackfoot Confederacy. So the Blackfoot Confederacy Tribal Council is a nonprofit regional managing organization representing the Blackfoot Confederacy nations of Kainai, Siksika, Piikani, and Amskapi Piikani. Our mission is to collaborate, restore, protect, honor, and enhance the collective culture, language, and self-identity of the Blackfoot people, and to establish political and economic sovereignty over Blackfoot territory, including natural resources, for the benefit of current and future generations of the Blackfoot people. So this is Blackfoot territory, our traditional territory. So it's includes lands in what are now Alberta, Saskatchewan, Montana, and Wyoming. And it was bounded on the west by the Rocky Mountains, on the north by the North Saskatchewan River, on the east by the Great Sand and Cypress Hills, and on the south by the Yellowstone River. So the territory was delineated through early explorers, documents, our elders' interviews, and place names. So that's how the territory was delineated. So as Natalie showed us at the beginning, you know, the crown of the continent is like the water tower of North America. So you can see east of the divides in northern Montana and southern Alberta was Blackfoot territory, or is Blackfoot territory. So, So this is kind of an older crown map. So our work we did this year was in the Upper Old Man. So right in here, we did some work in Pincher Creek and in the Belly River, and installed data loggers further downstream just to keep track of water temperatures. So again, this is Snappy's Playground, Livingstone River in Southwest Alberta. So I'm just going to talk about the Government of Canada's Aboriginal Fund for Species at Risk. I'm not going to read this verbatim because I'm pretty tight for time. So this just basically says that the Aboriginal Fund for Species at Risk facilitates, it was established in 2004, facilitates active participation by Indigenous communities in the implementation of the Species at Risk Act. And its objectives are to promote conservation and recovery of aquatic species at risk in their habitats, support the engagement and participation of Indigenous peoples in species at risk stewardship and SARA implementation. Okay, so again, Nappy's Playground, Upper Old Man River. The project objectives. We hired one field tech, or the intention was to hire one field tech from each Blackfoot nation. Due to the pandemic, the Blackfeet tribe in Montana was unable to participate in the field activities due to the border crossing issues. To conduct eDNA sampling in various tributaries of the Old Man and Bow watersheds to determine the presence, absence of cutthroat and bull trout, and other introduced trout species. To install water temperature loggers in various tributaries of the Oldman and Bow, to conduct stream habitat assessments and work with various government and non-government agencies to restore stream habitat that's been negatively affected by human developments, to conduct cutthroat and bull trout red surveys in various tributaries of the Oldman and Bow, to confirm cutthroat and bull trout spawning activity. Due to the pandemic, the start of the project was delayed until mid-August, and as a result, the cutthroat red surveys weren't conducted, although we did conduct one. And also, the last objective is to interview elders from each of the Blackfoot nations to document traditional ecological knowledge regarding the significance of native trout, water, and Blackfoot place names in traditional Blackfoot territory. So we kicked off the project in August. We had a 2-day training at the Oldman River Group Camp. So it was opened by William Big Bull of the Piikani Nation, who gave a blessing and talked about the knowledge that is inherent in everything, the hills and mountains, water, fish and wildlife. The training covered the importance of the headwaters as water source areas, riparian vegetation function, to maintain water quality and fish habitat, original and current range of native trout in Blackfoot territory, fish ID and differences between native and non-native trout, spawning behavior in red counts or nest counts, introduction to habitat disturbance and restoration, whirling disease in Blackfoot territory, the impacts on trout testing and decontamination, stream temperature is an important variable for trout and how it is monitored, and environmental DNA or eDNA, what it is, demonstration and training, and how to collect it. So this is William at our, this is at the Oldman River group camp. So there's William there, and there's a couple of our techs. There's me, I believe this is Blair, Alvin, first rider. Anyway, and yeah, we were just on a break, so this is kind of, it was pretty casual. Yeah, so we spent a total of 19 days in the field from July 1st to November 3rd. Actually, it was the middle of August to November. July 1st, Matthew, who's our biologist, Matthew Coombs, him and I went to the Porcupine Hills and went looking for cutthroat, and we actually found some, so that was good. And I wasn't aware until I found out that that's one of the last pure West Slope cutthroat trout populations left in Alberta, and it's scary because there's so much human use, but they're hanging on, so it's encouraging. So it included 6 days of collecting eDNA, 5 days installing stream temperature data loggers, 9 days of spawning surveys, 4 days of habitat restoration, and all 3 Blackfoot nations participated in all the work and types of work we performed. So eDNA sampling, we collected 13 samples, 5 in the St. Mary, 7 in the Oldman watersheds, 1 in the Bull River. It was taken on Evan Thomas Creek near the Kananaskis Lodge, which Siksika has part ownership of. The Evan Thomas Creek West Slope cutthroat trout population has disappeared in the last 5 years, and eDNA is being used to see if any fish are left. A previously undocumented population of West Slope cutthroat trout was identified during eDNA sampling on Shale Creek, which is adjacent to a coal exploration project in the Upper Oldman. So just fluked out, went to take a water sample and found these cutthroat spawning. So that's encouraging. But again, it's scary because the habitat is very degraded. Anyway, more eDNA results will be reported when the samples are analyzed over the winter. So this is just some pictures of some of the water sampling. This is Carly Greer. She's from the Piikani Nation. She was working in Waterton Park as a summer student, so she joined us. This is Blair and Brent Little Mustache taking water samples. This is Alvin First Rider from Kainai, Brent and Blair from Begunny, and this is the water filtering. So we start filtering the eDNA or the water samples, and you got to be really careful not to contaminate. So this is just our techs processing those samples. So habitat restoration work was conducted on 4 streams, 2 in the Old Man River, upstream of the Begunny Nation, Dutch Creek and Beaver Creek, 2 streams in the Bow, upstream of Siksika Nation, Sylvester Creek and Wipers Creek. Habitat restoration training involved hands-on training by an expert in the field, Dave Polster. Boy, Dave's amazing. He's done some awesome work. It involved a variety of bioengineering techniques using live willow stakes. Just some pictures. So this is Dutch Creek. It's a restoration project, and these partners are collaborating. So we were just talking about harvesting, or where they harvested willows, where they did some planting last year. As you can see, we're physically distanced in the field. And here we're just actually staking willows. This isn't on Dutch Creek, so we'll come back next year and see if the willow's caught. And this is Sophie Forstrom from the Old Man Watershed Council, I believe. Yeah, so we were just, she was just instructing us on how to do some of the habitat restoration. So spawning surveys were conducted by counting reds, the nests of the trout build. Total of 8 streams were surveyed. The North Belly River upstream of the blood timber limits. 7 streams that flow into the Old Man upstream of the Begunny Nation, Hidden Creek, Dutch Creek, Upper Old Man, Livingston River, Daisy, and Racehorse Creek. And spawning was observed and confirmed for both West Slope and Cutthroat, or West Slope, Cutthroat, and Bull Trout. And yeah, like I said, on July 1st, Matt and I traveled to the Porcupine Hills and confirmed cutthroat spawning in Beaver Creek. So here's just some pictures of our red surveys. Yeah, here's our crew measuring the reds in the creek. There's a red there, it's pretty distinct. And every time we move to a different stream, we have to decontaminate because whirling disease has been confirmed in the Belly, the Waterton, and the Old Man. So it's, yeah, so we had pretty stringent decontamination protocols. New stream temperature monitoring sites were set up with data loggers deployed at 6 new sites, including 1 on the Blood Reserve and 2 on the Begunny Reserve. Stream temperature data were downloaded from an additional 4 monitoring sites previously established by Alberta Environment and Parks. These data will help identify where temperatures are cold enough for native trout and help assess the risk of the spread of whirling disease. Whoops. Yeah, so here's some of our crew and volunteers. This is Joe Manyfingers. He works in Waterton Park. Joe came out a couple days, so you can see him pounding the data loggers into the stream substrate. This is Lance Breaker from Siksika. Whoops, sorry. A little sensitive with this mouse pad. Yeah, so just installing a data logger in the Belly River. This is way downstream on the Belly River. We're just checking the temperature logger. And you can see it's just a little white plastic housing, and inside is the data logger. It's like a little computer that logs the water temperature every hour. And so we'll come back next year and see what those were. And again, just our crew installing the data loggers, and yeah, so that was interesting. So project completion. So we're just in the process of compiling and analyzing our data. We'll discuss our findings, confirm our recommendations, and write the report. So this is year 1, and we're gonna be writing funding proposals for year 2. So no guarantees it'll continue next year, but we've had good support from our partners and the government of Canada. So hopefully it'll continue next year. So that's Chief Mountain. I just want to acknowledge on behalf of the project management team, I'd like to thank our project partners, Blackfoot Confederacy and the 4 tribes, Parks Canada, Waterton Lakes, Alberta Environment Parks, Cows and Fish, Old Man Watershed Council, the University of Victoria, Helbing Lab, and Trout Unlimited Canada. And the following individuals: Jack Royal, he's CEO for the Blackfoot Confederacy; the Environment Director, who was the project manager for our trout project, that's Kimmy Shade; our biologist, Matthew Coombs; and our technicians, Alvin Firstrider, Blair and Brent Little Mustache, and Lance Breaker. And that is the end. So, yeah, I don't have my chat on.
That's okay. Yeah, and please, if you have any questions for Elliot, please type them into the chat, or you can also unmute your speaker and ask a question that way. I see a question here. It's outstanding that the Government of Canada provides separate funding for First Nations to support species at risk work. Is it pretty competitive to receive funds? Do you know if most First Nations across Canada participate?
Good question. When I worked with the Blood Tribe, we began submitting funding proposals when this program started. So the Blood Tribe has been quite successful. Yeah, there's a breakdown on the Canada website of who all gets funded. They try to spread it out through each region. So there's the BC and the Mountain region, the Prairie region, and the Great Lakes region, and then the Atlantic Maritime region. So I believe that there's tribes that have been funded in all regions. Yeah, it is quite competitive. So hopefully we can get awarded funding for next year's project.
Awesome, thanks, Elliot.
So before I leave, Natalie, thank you again. And I kind of scrolled through who's all on here. So I just want to say hi to Mary Riddle and Aaron Sexton and Mike Durglow. Haven't seen you guys for a while, but you know, hopefully we can continue to work together. And just want to say that the CMP is doing a great job. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's worth noting that Elliot is
Has been a while,
one of
Elliot.
our co-founders, one of our CMP co-founders. So yeah, we're so happy to have you, Elliot, today. Okay, so next up we have Kate Wilson.
Natalie, can you see my screen? Awesome. All right, well, thank you everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. I wanted to, I guess I should introduce myself. I do work here in Montana for the DNRC, where I manage 2 commissions, one of which is focused on aquatic invasives. And so what I wanted to do today was remind you why you care about this issue with some scare tactics, my favorite, and then kind of walk through the evolution of the aquatic invasive species programs here in the West. And then finally share my perspective of the Crown Managers Partnership influence in the Alberta program, where I was previously the Aquatic Invasive Species Specialist. So to get started, let's talk about the catalyst for really moving a lot of aquatic invasive species programs in the West into high gear. And this is dreisseniid mussels, also known as zebra quagga. And I guess the point here is that we've known about a lot of different aquatic invasives for quite a long time, but these guys are literally the perfect poster child, and there's a few different reasons for that. So when we talk about other invasives like Eurasian milfoil or rusty crayfish or northern snakehead, you know, the impacts are generally more location-based. So if you live on the lake or you recreate or you're dependent on it for water, you probably will be affected. Whereas these zebra quagga mussels, it really is more of a societal community cost when you're looking at impacts and cost to the end user and impacts to the entire water-based industries. And so that's really a pivotal point for why things have changed so much or evolved so much in the last decade. And also, you know, zebra quagga mussels can survive a lot longer outside of water than a lot of those other invasives as well. And so we may not be as concerned about a plant being transported all the way across the country as we are mussels coming in from the Dakotas or even from Eastern Canada, because they can survive that long out of water. And then you add in the larval phase, the veligers, we call them, which are microscopic. So that means even standing water that looks clean and you can't see anything can pose just as much of a risk as an adult mussel. So literally been scaring the crap out of the West since about 2007, and I'll tell you a little bit later why that is significant. So a little bit more about mussels before we delve into impacts. They are freshwater mussels, which is likely part of why they're so kind of out of control here as opposed to their native range, which is the Black and Caspian Sea. And really notable here, unlike our native mussels, they can physically attach to substrates, including in the case of quagga mussels, softer substrates like sand, silt, even plants. And they're known for their rapid reproduction. But it is noteworthy that they're dioecious, so it takes a male and a female to reproduce. So there is that. They're not like clonal like New Zealand mud snails. And so the global definition that we follow is, you can't call something invasive unless it poses a risk to the environment, the economy, or human health. And again, in the case of these poster children, literally all three of those are at risk. So zebra quagga mussels are known for their ability to filter water. So one adult can filter up to 1 liter of water per day. And this can have massive impacts across the entire food web, from the phytoplankton all the way to the top. And then finally, the attachment piece that I mentioned earlier is really important in this case to the economic impact that they would have on hydropower, irrigation, even municipal water intakes and drinking water. And more recently, they've been linked to cyanobacteria blooms, which can affect human health and, of course, your pets as well. So we know how these species will move and how they are moving. So this map shows you that once a species is introduced, which has traditionally been by ballast water of large cargo ships coming to source waters like the Great Lakes, once they're there, they're moving from one water body to another, primarily on watercraft that's trailered overland and other water-based equipment. So this map shows you of the roughly 109,000 boat inspections that were conducted in Montana in 2018, where the boats originated from. So that's all the green and yellow. And then underlaid is areas that are positive for zebra quagga mussels. So we know this is not hypothetical, and that the best means of prevention is intercepting the boats and working with the boaters to understand the issue. I will say that this season has also been a record for many Western jurisdictions, which is a little surprising given the global pandemic, the border with Canada being closed. I know Fish, Wildlife, and Parks here in Montana are reporting over 140,000 boat inspections and 35 boats intercepted with mussels on them. So that is pretty alarming as well. So here's another kind of scary example. This is from Lake Winnipeg in Manitoba. This is in, let's see, 2014, they had their first detection. And this is the next season, one season in the water of substrates. You can see how dense the mussels have become. So now imagine that you have a boat in this water and you're going to take it to Montana or Alberta, or you have irrigation intake, or maybe you have a municipal drinking water plant. We're talking about pretty serious coverage in a short amount of time, and also a lot of ecological and economic impacts. So thanks to BC for this comparison on the left here. We have a lot of native mussels that are certainly at risk if we had an infestation, and you can see why on the photos on the right. So, zebra mussels will literally colonize other animals. And also it's important to note back to the left here that they're quite a bit smaller. And again, those native mussels cannot physically attach. So that's a really good identification tool for the public, is looking for that physical attachment. And just kind of wrapping up this scare tactics here with just summarizing all of the crazy impacts that we're seeing across North America include stinky tap water in Austin, Texas, the cost of treating ballast water on big freighters and commercial haulers. There's also the impacts on fisheries and the economic impact of that. Irrigation districts, banning access to water bodies that are infested, and even algae blooms and botulism associated with bird deaths. So this is all being attributed to mussels. All right, a little bit of a history lesson here. So why is 2007 important? Well, in that year, it was the first time that zebra mussels, and sorry, these are actually quagga, were detected in Lake Mead. So that's right outside of Las Vegas, and it signaled the first infestation west of the Mississippi River. So a lot of eyes on Lake Mead, and they were really bad really fast, as you can see in the photo. So it took about 2 years, and Idaho, well, not always known for their progressive environmental policy, I can say that because I worked there at the time, was actually the first state in the West to pass legislation that made watercraft inspections mandatory and also provided a funding mechanism so that it wouldn't be entirely dependent on the general fund, which I'll talk about can be risky. So now, this is just over a decade later, you see pretty much every single state and province in the West now has an aquatic invasive species program with mandatory inspections, some kind of monitoring and outreach efforts. And so I think, you know, working in a field that's sometimes, let's face it, a little depressing, this is amazing. Like, you don't see this kind of movement happen this quickly in most natural resource issues. So really want to applaud everyone's efforts in the West here. And I think there's several components for why that's happened. First of all, you know, you need a comprehensive program. It's not enough to just do inspections or just do education. You need to have all the different components in place. Also, I think utilizing partners, stakeholders, and regional groups, which I'm going to spend some time talking about in a minute. Also, being able to calculate what the cost might be has really been effective, and working towards sustainable funding and trying to get on the same page with messaging like clean, drain, dry. So here we are in the crown of the continent. So that's that little circle that just popped up. We also have this Columbia River Basin team that's really focused on standardizing protocols and boat inspections in the West. We have another group, the Western Regional Panel, that's worked on also a lot of the standards and protocols that exist. And then we have this international Pacific Northwest Economic Region that usually focuses on trade and transport issues, but has also been paying a lot of attention to this given the economic impact. So lots of awesome collaboration that's happening here. And focusing more on the Crown Managers Partnership, I was the Aquatic Invasive Species Specialist in Alberta from 2012 to 2017. And it really was the Crown Managers Partnership that served as a catalyst for getting a comprehensive program there. So some of the other efforts that the CMP does for aquatic invasives, they printed this awesome guide here. I just actually updated it and reprinted it. There's a lot of education and outreach and coordination that goes on between the jurisdictions, and more to come, I'm sure. So a little bit about what happened, and this is 2011. The CMP hosted, sorry, getting ahead of myself, hosted what they called a bow tie exercise. So this was a risk management tool that allowed for them to essentially zone in on the imminent threats that were posed to the Crown by aquatic invasives. So this is zebra quagga mussels and watercraft specifically carrying them. So it's a way to have all these decision makers and stakeholders and industry participate in identifying how they could mitigate this risk. And so that was really critical to opening the eyes of the government and getting to a place where we could actually build a program. So at that time in 2011, Alberta was the only jurisdiction in the Crown that did not have an active aquatic invasive species program. And that really did lead to a pilot in 2012 that was again focused on the Crown, which provided a really necessary incremental step given that we didn't have a provincial program. a challenge to that is it's a very small portion of the province. Here's a little map for you, zooming in. So it's a very small portion of the province. So when I came in, it was like, wow, this is great. I love the momentum. It's amazing that all these leaders participated in the bow tie exercise. But invasive species don't know boundaries, right? And so just focusing on one geographic area is a difficult place to start, but I think it was necessary for us and provided that catalyst to really have the buy-in of our decision makers and create a comprehensive program. So kudos to the CMP for that effort. And then real quick, I just wanted to mention some of the other pieces that have really helped move these programs in the West have been trying to calculate what an invasive, what a zebra mussel infestation could cost. And so Montana is actually the last one to complete that. And of note, the Ontario one is a figure that's based on their actual impacts, given that they've had these species for several years, sorry, several decades. And also funding models are really important. So if you can get away from using the general fund to support your whole program, I think the longevity and the risk to your program in a budget crisis really goes down. So this is just showing a lot of the different states in Alberta here at the bottom in terms of what they spend and how that funding is generated. So of note, program costs vary widely from 600,000 to 6 million. And a lot of them employ some kind of a user fee. While not always really popular at first, it does provide a way to not count solely on the general fund. And also of note, British Columbia and Montana are the only two jurisdictions that I know of that are using essentially like an industry tax on hydropower. And finally, one of the other key successes to a great program and coordination across the West has been the standardization of the clean, green, dry message. So it's positive, it's focused on behavior. And if you're traveling, you're gonna see the same type of messaging referring to the same practices the entire way on your journey. So with that, sorry, I know that was a little long, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was great. Again, please type any questions that you have for Kate in the chat. Okay, so here is one. It seems that you've had a lot of success up to this point, but you did mention an increase in boat traffic despite the border closures. What are some steps that are being taken given this increase in boat traffic?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think it was across the West, so I don't think it's unique to Montana, but I think just we have a really strong program here. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks does a really great job managing it, and I don't think that the increase in traffic, we weren't ready for it. So it's just like something to note that even in cases where, you know, there's wide uncertainty in economic and our daily lives, people still need to get outside and recreate. And so I think it's important, more important than ever, that we really drive home that message of personal behaviors and how important it is that you think about this before you move to the next water body. And also that coordination across jurisdictions is also more important than ever. Good question.
Thanks so much, Kate. And thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you to all of you that joined us today to learn about watershed integrity in the Crown. Keep your eyes peeled for an email that will have a link to this video and also contact information for our speakers so that you can follow up with any questions that may not have been able to be addressed today. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.